My name is Bella, and here I am, lying in a stark hospital room, struggling not just with my health but with the heavy weight of my marriage. For the past 2 years since marrying Ronald, I've come to realize that something deeply unsettling has been brewing beneath the veneer of our domestic life. Today, the starkness of my reality couldn't be clearer. My husband, Ronald, stood by my hospital bed with a scowl, his words cutting through the sterile air like a knife. "What's the deal here? This place is filthy," he complained, glancing around my hospital room with disdain. "You're obviously using your illness as a way to slack off on housework. You know how much I like things clean. Normally, you should come home even from the hospital to clean and greet your husband." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Lying here, battling cancer, and all he could think about was how the dust might settle on our home furniture? The absurdity of his complaint was almost laughable, if it weren't so painfully cruel. Ronald had changed, or perhaps, he had always been this way, and I had failed to see it. This man, who I once thought of as my partner, now seemed more like a stranger, a cold and unfeeling creature. The man I call my husband is likely not human. He must be a devil or something, I muttered under my breath, the sting of his words lingering in the air. Our problems began long before my diagnosis. It was as if Ronald had been slowly replaced by someone else after attending his high school reunion a year ago. He came back with grandiose ideas, showing me pictures of a trendy room, talking about unifying furniture colors to emulate the luxurious lifestyle of a successful businessman he had reconnected with. "I want to make the room look like this," he declared, pointing to a photo of a lavish, chic apartment that belonged to his friend. The changes he proposed were not just unrealistic, they were suffocating us financially and emotionally. He suggested moving to an apartment that would triple our current rent. "How are we going to pay for that?" I asked, my voice laden with worry. "You're good at budgeting, Bella. We're both working, so we'll figure it out, right?" he replied, his tone dismissive, as if the matter was trivial. That night, as I laid in the hospital, the gravity of my situation became painfully clear. My health was in jeopardy, and the man who should have been my rock was instead a source of deep distress. The words he didn't know yet were about to change everything. "I'm sorry, but your wife just passed away." These were just the words echoing in my mind, a prelude to the reckoning that awaited Ronald. This narrative, my narrative, is far from over. The reality of our frayed marriage and my fight for health is a testament to the struggles many face, hidden behind the closed doors of outwardly normal lives. As I lay here, contemplating the future, I knew changes were coming. And they were coming soon. I glared at Ronald sternly after his dismissive remark. His face momentarily registered fear and sadness, a stark contrast to the harshness of his earlier words. "Wow, calm down. I was just making a light comment." "It's a buzzkill when you can't even take a joke," he muttered under his breath, his eyes avoiding mine. But the tension between us told a different story. He was absolutely serious. Our disputes had grown more frequent and intense, and with them, my health began to decline. The onset of frequent stomach pains initially seemed like distress, a physical manifestation of our deteriorating relationship. However, the situation escalated alarmingly when I began experiencing unexplained bleeding that wouldn't stop. Concerned, I visited the nearby hospital, where after several tests, I was diagnosed with uterine cancer. The cold sterility of the doctor's office made me shiver involuntarily as he discussed my condition. "Do you plan on having children in the future?" he inquired gently. The question struck a deep chord, as preserving my uterus seemed unlikely given my condition. Removal was the best option. "I'll discuss it with my husband," I replied, my voice breaking as the reality of losing my uterus and with it, the possibility of ever having children sank in. Driving home, tears streamed down my face. I dreaded Ronald's reaction. He loved kids, and the thought of how this might affect our relationship weighed heavily on my mind. When I got home, Ronald and I sat down for a long, heartfelt discussion. He was deeply shocked by the news, but supportive. We decided that I would take a leave of absence from work to begin my treatment, and ultimately, we chose to proceed with the hysterectomy followed by chemotherapy. On the day of the surgery, Ronald took time off work to accompany me to the hospital. His cheerfulness seemed odd given the gravity of our situation. After enduring an 8-hour surgery, I awoke to the reality that my uterus was gone. The doctor reassured me that we had caught the disease at its lowest stage, which was a small consolation during my hospital stay. During my recovery in the hospital, visits from coworkers, friends, and particularly those with children, filled me with a bittersweet feeling. My father-in-law, Walt, and mother-in-law, Amelia, also visited. Amelia's attempt to offer sympathy was overshadowed by her pressing advice. "We understand it's hard for you, Bella, but going forward, please manage the household and finances well," she said, her timing less than ideal. Walt quickly intervened, "Not now, Amelia. Bella, don't worry about it." Their intentions were unclear, but the distraction was welcome. Ronald's visits were oddly upbeat. "You're going to be surprised when you get out, Bella. Just look forward to it," he kept saying. Although I was curious about the surprise he hinted at, I was just relieved he visited me at all. After some time, the doctors agreed to a temporary discharge from the hospital, allowing me some reprieve and the comfort of being at home for a while. The prospect of returning home brought mixed feelings, but it was a much-needed break from the sterile environment of the hospital. Thrilled to be returning home after the sterile confinement of the hospital, I was eager for the comfort of familiar surroundings. However, my excitement was tempered by the knowledge that I would soon be readmitted for chemotherapy. As Ronald drove me home, he warned with an odd smile, "Don't be shocked when you see the house, okay?" A feeling of unease gripped me, but nothing could have prepared me for what awaited. The moment I stepped through the front door, I was stunned. Our home, once a haven of light and airy spaces accented with soft white tones, had been transformed into something entirely different. It now boasted dark, chic aesthetics, filled with black furniture that replaced my beloved sofa, table, and even the rugs. These new pieces were clearly catered to Ronald's taste, not mine. The appliances, too, were all black, meticulously coordinated to match the new decor. As I stood frozen in shock, Ronald gleefully announced, "Cool, right? I did this all by myself. Oh, and we can exchange the wallpaper back when we leave, so that'll be an extra expense." His enthusiasm felt like a sharp jab to my already fragile state. I suddenly remembered something and rushed to our bedroom, only to find it completely altered as well. "Where is my dresser?" I asked, a sense of panic rising within me. Caught off guard, Ronald stumbled for words. Sorry, I got carried away and, threw it away." I exploded in anger. "Threw it away? Are you kidding me? I've told you how important that dresser is to me, Ronald. Bring it back right now." Every shout intensified the pain from my recent surgeries. Ronald paused before blurting out, dismissively, "Well, what's thrown away is thrown away. Deal with it." So annoying. Then he stormed out. Alone in this unfamiliar space, I sank to the floor, unable to hold back the tears. That dresser was not just furniture, it was a cherished gift from my mom when I first moved out for my job. After my parents divorced in elementary school, I had lived with my mom until she passed away in a car accident not long after I got married. That dresser was irreplaceable to me, and I had told Ronald many times about its sentimental value. Between my hospital stays, life became a living nightmare. I had been looking forward to coming home, but my husband continued to be in a bad mood, barely speaking to me. When he did, his words were sharp and hurtful. "You're home all day, at least do some housework. Look at this dust, are you really okay with this? It's embarrassing for a woman." Exhausted and still in recovery, I responded, "How about you do some things for yourself for once? You only clean what's visible, Ronald. You could at least clean the drain or the toilet." Life at home was becoming as taxing as the illness itself, with my physical and emotional reserves being constantly drained by the new, unwelcoming environment and Ronald's cold indifference. Returning home after the initial rounds of chemotherapy was an ordeal, given Ronald's increasingly passive-aggressive behavior. He deliberately avoided washing my clothes and would flaunt his food in front of me, eating without offering any to me. Exhausted by his childish antics, I turned to friends to help with groceries. On the day of my readmission to the hospital for further treatment, Ronald didn't accompany me. I went alone, a stark reminder of the growing rift between us. The chemotherapy sessions were more grueling than I had imagined. The physical effects were severe, but nothing was as emotionally unsettling as watching my carefully maintained hair begin to fall out. Shortly after my admission, Ronald left for an extended business trip. I had hoped he might call to check on me, but the calls never came. One day, while I was lying weakly in my hospital bed, my mobile phone started ringing repeatedly. Too drained to engage, especially fearing it might be Ronald, I hesitated to pick up. Eventually, the hospital staff, seeing the caller ID and my reluctance, switched the call to speaker. Ronald's voice boomed through the phone, his tone accusatory and harsh. "What the hell is this? The house is a mess. You're obviously just using your illness as an excuse to avoid housework. I like a clean house, you should be welcoming me home by cleaning." The nurse handing me the phone looked as distressed as I felt. But to my surprise and relief, it wasn't me who responded to Ronald's ridiculous outburst. "Unfortunately, your wife has just finished her discharge briefing and is about to handle some paperwork. Could you please not disrupt her with your nonsense?" the nurse replied, her voice calm but firm. Ronald's flustered voice, "If you'd been listening, who do you think you are? You could just clean yourself." The attending doctor, who had overheard the conversation, took the phone from the nurse. "I've been a doctor for many years, and I've never met someone as unreasonable as you. You're annoying," he said before promptly hanging up. After a moment, he turned to me and apologized for his outburst, explaining he had a daughter and the situation got to him emotionally. "Don't worry about it, doctor," I responded, a faint smile crossing my lips. "I plan on divorcing him anyway, so it's no big deal." Upon hearing my response, the doctor smiled, clearly relieved. "Well, that's good to hear." After being discharged from the hospital, I didn't go home. Instead, I headed straight to a particular place to start the process I had decided upon. Not long after, Ronald burst into the room, his face flushed and his demeanor anxious. "Bella, why are you here?" Seeing me, he didn't offer a word of concern but just stood there, frozen. "It's Bella's discharge day, so we came to pick her up." "Now sit down, Ronald," Amelia, sitting beside me, said coldly. Ronald blinked rapidly, visibly shaken, looking like he was hiding something. His discomfort was evident, and for the first time, I felt a shift in power. As I looked at him, his eyes darting around the room, I knew that the path I was on was the right one, despite the hardships that lay ahead. "Oh, Bella, and us an apology," Amelia insisted, her voice firm yet filled with a surprising warmth that hadn't been there before. Ronald, however, remained silent, his face unreadable, his lips pressed tightly together. "Ronald, you asked us for financial help, claiming that Bella was overspending. Isn't that all a lie?" Walt's furious voice echoed throughout the room, breaking the tense silence that had fallen over us. It was a shocking revelation. Ronald had been lying, and it was a nasty lie at that. During my second hospital stay, Walt and Amelia had approached me with concern. "Bella, we know it's not the best time, but we're not exactly flush with cash either. We hope this will be the last time we have to lend you money," Amelia had said, her expression troubled. Confused, I had looked at them, completely unaware of what they were talking about. It was then we realized, for the first time, that Ronald had been outrageously lying to them. It turned out Ronald had been getting financial help from Walt and Amelia by claiming my supposed overspending was straining our budget. Feeling emboldened, he had approached them for money several times. "If it's hard for you to say, I can talk to Bella about it," Amelia had offered, but Ronald flatly refused, spinning his web of deceit. Naturally, his story was pure fabrication, and even Walt and Amelia had grown suspicious of Ronald, who kept asking for money while I was hospitalized. Then he apparently pleaded for help again, claiming my hospital bills were astronomical. Upon hearing this, I instantly knew where the money was going. Once you step into our home, you'll quickly see what Ronald spent the money on, I told Walt and Amelia, handing them the house key. As expected, they came back to the hospital room with astonished looks on their faces. "What's up with that room? How much did it cost to change it like that?" they asked. I didn't hold back when I told them that Ronald had acted on his own without consulting me. I explained about the terrible treatment I received during my temporary discharge from the hospital and stated my intention to end our married life and proceed with a divorce. The most frustrating part, I revealed, was how he threw away the dresser my mom had bought for me. "I'm not coming back," I affirmed. Amelia grabbed my hand, her eyes filled with tears. "The dresser he threw away? The dresser from your mom? Ronald will pay for this," she declared, her voice thick with emotion. In fact, Amelia and I had an awkward start, but during a visit to her family home, I had admired a beautiful chest. "It's lovely," I had commented. Amelia beamed. "Actually, this chest was passed down from my grandmother to Mom, and from Mom to me." When I told her about my cherished dresser, a bond formed between us, strengthened by our shared appreciation for family heirlooms and the sentimental value they held. This connection now seemed to draw us even closer in the face of the turmoil caused by Ronald's deceit and insensitivity. Amelia's gesture of offering me the family chest resonated deeply with me, especially after my conversation with Ronald. "Didn't you plan to use our joint savings for it, but couldn't because it's in my name, so you had to borrow from your parents?" My accusations were spot on, leaving Ronald speechless, his face turning a bright red. We had a dual income arrangement where living expenses went into an account in Ronald's name, while savings, primarily intended for our future child, were in my account. When I was diagnosed with cancer, Ronald seemed to think, "We can't have kids anyway, might as well use that money for whatever I want." This realization broke my heart further. "Can't you see how much I've cherished Bella? How can you even talk about divorce? This is unfair," Ronald sobbed, looking utterly defeated. Amelia, sitting next to me, chimed in, her voice steady yet filled with disappointment. "Someone who really cares wouldn't say such awful things. It's no big deal if the house gets dusty when no one's there. Walt and I were right there when you made that ridiculous call to the hospital. We were so disappointed we could cry." Walt's face was flushed with anger as he stared down at Ronald. It was a relief to have such reasonable people on my side, supporting me through not just the emotional turmoil of a failing marriage, but also the physical and emotional toll of my treatments. "Ronald, you don't even seem to care about my well-being, let alone my hair loss and frail body. All you care about is saving your own skin. That's why this isn't working. I've supported you, Ronald, but who's going to support me?" I asked, my voice thick with emotion. Ronald lowered his gaze and said nothing more. After that, we finalized our divorce. Thanks to Walt and Amelia's intervention, Ronald wasn't pleased, but the division of assets went largely in my favor. Reluctantly, Ronald repaid the $10,000 he had borrowed from Walt and Amelia. I was shocked to learn how much he had taken without my knowledge. It turns out Ronald couldn't afford to keep the apartment we had been so particular about, and he had to move out. The floors were scratched from dragging furniture, and there were even holes in the walls, signs of a hasty and careless exit. Even worse, the realization of how much had been hidden from me dawned clearer with each passing moment, confirming that my decision to end the marriage was justified. After Ronald moved out, he tried to claim that the damages to the apartment, the scratched floors and holes in the walls, along with the unauthorized wallpaper replacement, were already there when we moved in. However, his assertions quickly crumbled when the management company requested proof from the move-in condition. Fortunately, I had taken photos when we first moved in, which I provided to the management. This evidence left Ronald with no choice but to incur some repair costs, albeit not a huge sum, but still more than he could afford. He asked Walt and Amelia for help, but after everything that had happened, they disowned him and kicked him out. Amelia later told me he was now living in a cheap apartment, struggling with debt. Ronald should have just made do with what he had instead of always living beyond his means. I heard through a friend who works at the same company as my ex-husband that his reputation had taken a nosedive. He's now viewed, particularly by the female staff, as the creep who tormented his sick wife. It's something that he brought upon himself, and something he'll likely regret for the rest of his life. As for me, I'm savoring living alone again. After the ordeal of the past years, I've been keeping a close eye on my health and plan to return to work once I feel more stable physically. My boss has been incredibly understanding, encouraging me to take it at my own pace, for which I am immensely grateful. I still catch up with Walt and Amelia from time to time. They have truly been my support through this tumultuous period. During one of our phone chats, Amelia joyously mentioned how great it was that Mom's dresser came back to me. I had moved recently, taking some items I no longer needed to a thrift shop. While the items were being appraised, I froze in disbelief. There it was, the dresser my mom had given me. It didn't matter whether someone had found it in the dump and brought it in, to me, it was priceless. No other dresser could replace the sentimental value it held for me. A few days later, the dresser, now cleaned up a bit, arrived at my new place. Tucked away in the back corner, in small letters, were the words, "Bella, never give up," penned by my late mother. Life indeed has its ups and downs, but remembering my mom's words has kept me pushing through. And that's not going to change. I'm all set to live my new life.